Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi, and welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia. Actually, the full title is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I've had several of those over the years, so I guess the AT was another in a long line of midlife crises for me. Funnily enough, I've been chatting to some people recently about what this hike can do to your head and the changes it can make in your life. If you're in a crisis, this is excellent therapy. For episode number 65, today's guest, Julie Jester Gayheart, is a really enthusiastic hiker. In fact, when I was editing our conversation, I was struck at how much we were just having a laugh about the trail and her adventures. She's a really lovely lady who's a section hiker with a lot of miles under her feet. I think you're going to love Julie just as much as I did. But first, we're going to start off with a little bit of breakfast. When I was hiking, I'd wake up to my alarm, deflate my AirPad and contemplate my blah breakfast. Every morning I poured water into those different coloured paper bags, scrunch around the ingredients, not one of which had any association with fruits, and then eat that soulless gunk. I then find unhydrated powder and sugar in the crevices of the bag. Trailtopia's blueberry oatmeal is a bit of a novelty because it actually has real blueberries. Who'da thunk? No gunk. It tastes great. The bag design ensures complete hydration and it really sets you up for the day. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. I love their breakfasts. Actually, some listeners have written to me with questions about Trailtopia, so I'm going to be having Vince Robichaud, our sponsor and the owner of the company, on the show next week to tell us how it all started and his hiking background. As you know, Doctor Lynne has taken December off, so Vince is going to step in for us next week. The Doc Spot replacement this week is the first one in a series, I hope, of segments that I started thinking about a few weeks ago. Somebody had written to me about getting guests to talk about some of the other, often smaller trails apart from the AT, PCT and CDT. I thought it was a great idea, and I asked for people to step up to be interviewed. The response has been great, and today's guest is Eliza Newland, talking to us about the North Fork Mountain Trail. I hope that you like it. So now, kick back, grab a beer, a glass of wine, or just water, or all three, and listen to Julie Gayheart or Jester. Okay, our guest today is Julie Jester Gayheart. Hi Julie, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. And I think my first question would be, why on earth are you Jester? It's a pretty cool name, so why are you Jester?
Well, I originally got my name Jester. Obviously, it was on the trail. It was the first time I ever went out for a hike on the trail. And needless to say, anything that could have gone wrong on that hike went wrong. There were 5 of us ladies. We went out on the trail. It rained, it poured. We didn't have a clue what we were doing. And one evening, we finally got to camp. Literally, we had pots and pans. We were like a traveling circus. And we had made our dinner, and I went over to get my portion of the dinner, and it literally all dumped on the ground.
Nice.
And
nice.
I just turned around, and I picked it up. I put it in my bowl, and I just kind of made a joke of it and just started eating. And I was like, well, what are you going to do? And one of the ladies I was hiking with, she was like, oh, my God, you are a jester. So that's kind of how it got started, and I just stuck with it ever since.
Isn't it funny how these names, I don't always ask, but I think some of these names are so great and they happen almost organically, don't they? And I'm glad I didn't leave my own name to chance, but I still love hearing how other people got theirs.
At the time, I didn't really understand the trail culture and that, you went by trail names. So it all just kind of happened naturally. It was great.
Yeah, it really is nice, yeah. So what is your hiking background? Have you done a lot in the past?
Not really. My hiking background actually started the first time I stepped on the AT and did that first 3-day section hike, and that was back in 2006, and I really haven't stopped since.
And what was the motivation to do that then?
My motivation to do that is I actually conned 4 of my really good, I used to do a lot of running. I used to run marathons and got into trail running. And there were these ladies that I used to go to workouts with, and I said, oh, my God, don't you all think it would be awesome to hike the Appalachian Trail? And they were like, oh, my God, she's crazy. What is she talking about? But eventually I convinced them to do it. And it just kind of went from there. We didn't really have a clue. I had no hiking equipment. And really, I'd never even been camping before. But I just had this idea in my brain that I wanted to go out on the AT.
So what was it about the AT that drew you to it? Or was it just the coincidence of getting on it for your first 3-day hike and then doing something? Or was it something about the AT before you even stepped on it that really drew you in?
I'm not sure what originally drew me in. I grew up, my dad was an outdoorsman. He did a lot of fishing, and everything we did, was centered around outside. We actually had a truck camper, but I think it was more of his dream to go camping because we never actually went camping. But I just remember watching shows on TV, and somewhere along the way, I had to have watched an episode with my dad about the Appalachian Trail. And he was like, oh, I wish, I'd love to do that someday. It just seems really cool. And somewhere in my mind as a teenager, I just knew I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. I didn't really know when. I didn't know how. I didn't have a clue. And that's really kind of how it got started. And when I had convinced these girls to go with me, we were clueless. We literally went.
I tell you, there is nothing wrong with that. You can learn as you go along. That's the great thing about it.
Yeah. We went to the local outfitter and we talked to one of the guys working there, and he said, "Oh, here, do this section." I knew there was a beginning and an end, but I just wanted to be on the trail. I didn't care where it was, and it made sense to go in North Carolina because that's where we live. So that's kind of how it got started.
So what was your first 3-day section then?
The first 3-day section, we went from I-40 to Hot Springs.
Oh, nice. Okay, nice.
And, literally that normally takes you 2 to 3 days. It took us 4.5 days to get from, so you can imagine, from I-40 to Hot Springs.
So did your father ever get the chance to go on it at all?
Yeah.
Oh, he did? He did do it?
He actually came out in 2016.
Cool.
He spent 10 days with me in Maine.
All right, how lovely, how nice of you to. I always think, when a parent and a child, however old the child is, you're still the child to the parent. I think that's a wonderful thing when you can go out on the trail together. That must have been a really, really nice moment for you.
It was really great. I don't think he would ever do it again because literally he went from Dayton, Ohio to, we did the area of the Kennebec. We did the Bigelows. We did some.
Oh, on the Bigelows, beautiful though. Oh, amazing. Absolutely amazing.
We did a 17-mile stretch through there. Yeah, my dad, he loved it, but he looked at me on the last day and he said, I get it now.
That's an interesting thing. Did you ever ask him what he meant by that, or was it you just understood?
Yeah, I asked him. I said, he goes, I don't think I ever really got it. When you said you were going out hiking,
right.
I just thought you were going for a walk in the woods. He goes, this is no walk in the woods. And I think it really takes people getting out there to actually see, you're carrying the weight, you're spending the night out, you're thinking about food, water, shelter, and you really don't have time to think a lot about anything else. And he just said, I get it. And then we just had that. I knew he got it.
That's nice. That is really nice. Now, we haven't actually explained your approach to it, and you do have a rather different approach to the AT. I know you are a section hiker, but I've sort of noted you down as a section hiker with thru-hiker tendencies, and I know that you've completed an entire thru-hike, in these sections. How long did that take you to do?
It actually took me 12 summers. So I started in 2006,
right,
and I completed in July 2017.
And were you out every summer?
I was out every summer, and it would depend on what other things I had. I teach high school, so for the last 12 years, I could almost plan a year ahead. So
nice.
I would try to pick up where I left off, and obviously over the years, I had started in Hot Springs, and then I went back to Georgia. And then somewhere along the way in Georgia, I had stayed at the Hike Inn, and Jeff and Nancy were running the Hike Inn at the time, and Jeff looked at me and he goes, "Oh God, you better go up north, before your knees give out on you." So I skipped ahead and went up to Vermont. So there's really nothing traditional about how I finished this hike.
So your actual start was I-40, was it, you say?
I consider it I-40, yes. Even though I did go back, I did the approach trail just because I know it's not white blaze, and some people have, I only do white blazes. But I wanted to do, I still in my mind want to go back to Mount Oglethorpe because it's the original mountain trail started on. Yeah, you're right. So I still have, and I'm probably going to do that soon just because it's just part of the AT and the history, and I still want to go back and do that. So, but I have backtracked and, and then just kind of started filling in the pieces.
Have you gone both? Have you gone in both directions then? Have you gone north and south?
Oh, I've gone north. I've gone south. You name it, I've done it. I've backpacked. I've slack packed.
Cool.
Putting day hikes together.
So if I-40 was your start, where was your actual finish when you'd actually completed the full thing in July this year?
Rangeley, Maine.
It's not as dramatic, is it? Why didn't you save Katahdin?
But I did spend the last day.
Why didn't you save Katahdin for your last day?
Well, I did not save Katahdin for my last day because actually in my last 3 years of hiking the trail, I never thought I was ever going to get to Katahdin. So in 2016, I said, I'm going to Katahdin.
All right.
So in the summer of 16, I actually started at Katahdin and went south through the 100-mile wilderness. I had to backtrack because I had to finish some days in the Whites. I went back to the Whites, and then my dad met me, and then I did some parts in Maine. So even that wasn't traditional. I just was tired of not getting to Katahdin.
So let's backtrack a sec then. So you did Katahdin in 2016 going south. So you went up there, went down there and carried on going south. So you go in the school holidays, so I guess July, August time. So you must have seen a few thru-hikers finish.
Oh, I saw, we actually finished up on Katahdin there weren't a lot of northbounders, but I actually spent the summer with a lot of southbounders. So
what did you think of that as a finish when you saw it, when you went up there and you saw the sign? Did you get that? Did you understand how exciting that would have been to have been the finish?
Yes, I did. And I actually was just so glad to be up there. I mean, I had been dreaming about Katahdin. At that time, it was 12 years. And it just took such an effort to get to Katahdin because I kind of went from the Couts to Katahdin. So no trail legs, no anything. Literally, like Katahdin was day one.
That's one of the things I think of always about these southbounders. They're starting on Katahdin. Oh, my God, it must have been a nightmare for them every time.
It was a nightmare to get up there. I didn't even think I was going to get up there. When I got to the tablelands, I just started crying. I was where is it? Like, I was just like, where is that sign? And then when I got the sign.
I tell you what, though, doesn't it? There's so many false summits there, aren't there? You think you're going to see it, you think it's there, and then suddenly you go up a bit further, then you think it's there, then you go up a bit further. I couldn't wait for it. I kept seeing what I thought was a summit, and then it wasn't when I got over it, and then suddenly then I saw it. And it was just an absolutely amazing time, it really was.
Yeah, it's maddening. It's maddening.
Now, I presume you had a map and filled in the gaps as you went along. Was it a deliberate? Did you plan well ahead all the time, or how were you trying to plan your hike? Was it just, well, we got a gap here, let's fill that bit in, and we got a gap there, let's fill that bit in?
That's kind of how it started. I actually didn't have a map. I actually started off with, I guess it was AWOL's guide. It was actually called the Thru-Hiker's Companion.
I've got that. That's what I used.
I had gone to a local outfitter, and they said, "Oh no, you need the Thru-Hiker's Companion."
Yeah.
So I have my original Thru-Hiker's Companion, and I've made all my notes in the companion. I would just go back and fill in the gaps. If I had to really, I would almost put my hike a third, and a third. And what I mean by that is like the first 3 or 4 years, it was all about, oh my God, I'm so glad to be on the trail. I'm starting to figure all this out. I'm starting to lighten my pack. the next 4 years was, okay, I got to get down to business. I really need to figure out how to get this done. And then the last 3 or 4 years was, I've got to get this over with. So it's almost like, I guess if you're doing a 6-month through hike, it's like you're in the honeymoon phase when you get to Georgia, or if you're in Katahdin, and then it's like, oh my God, I love it. And you're meeting everybody, and you realize there's trail angels, and you're staying at all the hostels. And then by the time, you know, you get to New Hampshire and Maine, you're over it and you want it done. Yeah. So I could almost put that as, even though it took me 12 years to do it, I still had that same cycle.
Well, I tell you what, I was hiking with a bunch of people who were far faster than I was, and suddenly I overtook them, and I couldn't understand why I overtook them. They had deliberately slowed down because they were enjoying it so much. They didn't want it to be over at all. They wanted to wait really right until the very last time they thought they could get up Katahdin. And, they slowed right down. I mean, for me, you're right. I had those sections, and with about 400 or 500 miles to go, it was no more about the journey. It was about the destination. I wanted that picture at the top of Katahdin, and I was tired by then. So for me, it was definitely like that. And it sounds like you had a similar thing, which I think is great.
Yeah, the last couple of years, pretty much I was like, all right, this is the section I need to do, and let's do it, and let's get it done.
Now, the wonderful thing about your kind of, and I use the word piecemeal hike, and not out of disrespect, but it's kind of cobbling a hike together, that you're actually only 800 miles from completing a second through hike. Have you, firstly, when do you think that's going to be done?
Well, that's a good question. This past summer when I ended in Rangeley, I actually said goodbye to the trail, and I actually have it on videotape. I said, goodbye, Appalachian Trail. In fact, I may never hike again. So my mind was just so relieved.
Yes, I bet, yeah.
And I didn't really realize when I came home until I started looking, probably mid-September, early October of this past year. I'm like, oh my God, I only have like 800 miles of this. And then I was just like, no, don't do this to yourself.
Isn't it funny how you think you're never going to do it again? I said I would never, ever, ever hike again, ever. And yet, you just want to get back to it. So you've now changed your mind. You're going to complete that second one then?
I got to complete that second one.
Of course you
I'm
have.
not going to put the pressure on myself, but I still have to work myself back to going to New Hampshire and Maine, because I feel like every time I've gone to those states, I've never really had trail legs. So I'm earning my trail legs in New Hampshire and Maine. So, yeah, I got to do it.
Do you think you'll finish on Katahdin this time?
No, I think I'll go up to Katahdin. Well, I'm not sure, because I purposely went up to Katahdin, and then I came back down. So doesn't that count as a second? So if you go up and finish, you turn around and you come back down, right?
No. No, you gotta, no, you're not gonna get away with that. there's a yellow blazer, and then there's a Katahdin blazer. That is not a good thing. No.
So, yes, of course, I would actually love to have, I actually think in my mind, if I'm telling the truth, I actually think I'll finish my second section hike. And then I think when I retire from teaching, I will actually do a through hike, because I still have it in my brain that I have not through hiked the trail. I know. I can't explain it.
You don't have to explain it to me. I totally understand, and anybody listening to this would totally understand. There's just a feeling that you think, not that there's nothing at all about doing the hike the way you've done it that's in any way inferior to anybody else's hike. You've done it, so that's fine. But I entirely understand why you would want to do an end-to-end through hike, because it's so damn exciting. It really is.
It is, and I still want to engross myself into the community more. Yeah. Even though I have that trail community feeling, as a section hiker, you're only in it so long, and then you're back out of it.
Yeah. Now, the two hikes you've done, and I don't know how you think back on these at all, can you compare the two? What I mean by that is, the one you've done, you've got that one complete, and you've got other sections done of the other one. Did you have a different feeling when you did those second bits a second time, if you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I don't think so. I think my second section hike I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time. I would go out and hike a section, and then I would just be in love with that section. So I would want people to do that section too. So I was like, oh my God, I just hiked this section. I mean, I've been through the Smokies like 5 times. I've done Georgia like 5 times. It's like,
you like hiking, don't you?
I can't help it. If somebody wants to go hiking, like, I'm packing my bag and I've got one foot out the door going, how can I get involved in this?
So what do you do? Do you still go with a bunch of ladies?
Well, I go with we start off with a group of 5 of us, and eventually that dwindled down to 2, and then eventually it dwindled down to me, and then eventually I met people on the trail who wanted to hike. I've met groups of people hiking along the way, and really I've met probably 2 of my best friends ever that I do pretty much all my hiking with now. Those 2 ladies actually finished the trail in 2015.
Nice.
But they came back in 2016 with me, and they came back in 2017 with me just because originally we all thought all 3 of us were going to finish the trail together, but I actually had an accident and I was not able to finish the trail. So none of us felt right.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that now, actually, I think. I know that you've had a few issues, in fact, not just the one, but a few issues with Mt Moosilauke. And I don't know how you say it. I say it Moosilauke. I may be entirely incorrect. So
yeah, I say it Moosilauke until, someone in New Hampshire told me it was Moosilauke. So I still call it Mt Moosilauke.
Okay, so tell us about what happened on Mt Moosilauke.
The first time I went up Mt Moosilauke, well, I never actually made it to the top of Mt Moosilauke. It was actually a beautiful morning. I was with another hiking buddy of mine, and she and I were hiking south, going up the steep part of Mt Moosilauke.
Oh, yes.
And we kind of got separated. That terrain is awful, so you kind of want to have some room, to maneuver.
Isn't it narrow as well? It's very narrow.
It's very narrow.
Right by the waterfall.
It has the waterfall right beside it.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
I had just taken a picture. There's a sign. You don't get too far up, and it says dangerous, treacherous.
That's right. Yeah.
Beware, that kind of signage. And I kind of chuckled inside and took a picture of the sign. And literally, probably 5 steps later, I had just gone to step up on one of those horrendous rock slabs where you're not paying attention. You can slide back.
Oh, yeah.
And I just stepped up, and literally I just started sliding back, and all my weight went back because of the steepness of the trail.
Yeah.
And I fell back into a tree. And instead of going into the waterfall, I reached out my right arm and just literally grabbed onto the tree.
Wow, you're lucky.
I'd had just enough wit about me to grab onto the tree, and then I realized, okay, something's the matter. I think I thought I broke my collarbone, because that's kind of what it felt like.
Wow.
And in that moment, the only thing I knew to do was hang on to the tree, because I just thought, okay, you can live without an arm, but if you let go of this tree and you bang your head, I don't know. I just remember that going through my mind.
Nice.
And I knew my hiking buddy was behind me. And before she got to where I was, there were a group of guys coming down the trail that looked like probably Boy Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember one of the guys looking at me going, and I was like, yeah, I need help. And he literally picked me up, turned me around, and sat me down on a rock and literally held my arm because I could not move it or I was in excruciating pain.
Oh, wow.
So at that time, we were all trying to figure out what in the world we were going to do, because I was stuck, up there. I couldn't move my arm, and nobody's phone would work. But I happened to have one of those spot devices.
Yeah.
So I set off the spot, and I was like, we're just going to have to wait, because then I started getting nauseous, and I started not feeling right, and just something was the matter. And out of nowhere, this guy comes bebopping down the trail, and he looks over at me, and he's like, it was an instant. He said, "You dislocated your arm. I need you to do this." He told the guys what to do. He looked at me. He said, "Put your other arm around me." And next thing I know, he had popped my arm up, and my arm was back in. I mean, it was just like, and I didn't have time to think about it.
What that felt like?
It didn't feel good, but after I realized what happened, I was like, wow, I can move my arm.
Awesome.
And this gentleman, he told the Boy Scouts to grab my pack. He said, take her poles. We got to get her off this mountain. And I just went with him. I didn't even think anything about it.
Was it shock? Was shock setting in?
It was shock setting in. And when we had gotten back down to the trailhead there, because I had set my spot off, there were some guys coming up the trail. And he knew them. And at the time, I really didn't think anything about it. And he was like, yeah, she had a dislocation, blah, blah, blah. And the two guys, the rescue guys that were coming up the trail, they were like, ma'am, we're going to need to look at your pack. And I looked at this guy and I said, you can have it. I may never hike again. I don't know what just happened. So he took my pack. And apparently in the state of New Hampshire, if you call for a rescue, they're going to charge you if you don't have a certain amount of things in your pack. So apparently they had gone through the pack, and the guy came back over and he goes, I just want to let you know we're not going to charge you. You had all the minimum required gear. And I was like, well, thank goodness.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so in New Hampshire, because so many people go out unprepared, they actually have a checklist. If you don't have things with you, they charge you for...
What a good idea. Darn right. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, so that happened. And then, we got settled down. He's like, I think you're probably going to need to go to the emergency room. And I got the guy's name. His name was Jim Gagney, and he gave me his website. Well, I was just depressed at the time, like I was not going to be able to finish. I was like, oh, my God, here we go. I'm going to go back home. Who knows? I'm going to have surgery. So when I got back home, I said, well, let me look up on this guy's website. So I look on his website. He is the only guy in New Hampshire that has summited all the 7 summits. He was a rescue nurse on Everest. His credentials went on, and he never said anything about it.
Wow, you were lucky he came along, weren't you? Crikey.
I was lucky he came along.
The trail provides, Julie, the trail provides every single time. The trail
provided, that's all I can say.
Isn't that amazing? I know you had another issue with Moosilauke a year later, didn't you?
Well, a year later, of course, I was going to go conquer Moosilauke, and the night before, I was going to go up and take on the mountain, again, hiking south. Yeah. I was actually in a small little bed and breakfast in Lyme, New Hampshire, and 5 o'clock in the morning, I was coming down a narrow stairway, and I was carrying a bag, and the weight of the bag popped my arm out again. So I dislocated my arm at 5 a.m. in the morning in this bed and breakfast. And believe me, you didn't want to be around when that happened, because I don't even have a clue what came out of my mouth. But I'm telling you what, those people at that bed and breakfast, they were wonderful. They took me to the hospital, and here I go again in New Hampshire going to the hospital. So that was 2015. So I finally conquered Moosilauke in 2016.
It's worth the wait, isn't it? It's absolutely beautiful.
It's definitely worth the wait.
Yeah.
Moosilauke was my Katahdin. When I had gotten to the top of Moosilauke with no injuries, no problems, I literally felt like that was my Katahdin. That was my moment that I wasn't mad at the trail anymore, because I was mad at the trail. Like, the trail did this to me. Like, how could the trail do this to me? So when I got to the top of Moosilauke, I was like, oh my God, I love the trail again. So
that's lovely. That's really nice. Now, I'm a little bit nervous about asking this question, but when we communicated originally, you said that you'd love to talk about, and I put this in inverted commas, what I do not recommend. Oh. Bear in mind, this is listened to by some youngsters as well. What do you not recommend? Okay,
so the youngsters, what I do not recommend came about on, you have those talks on the trail and you're like, oh my God, I wouldn't do this again. I wouldn't do that again. And it really came about of terrible, funny things that happened to you on the trail. So, for example, I said I was going to go out on an I do not recommend tour. So I do not recommend grabbing onto a dead tree when you're going to the restroom. So you can imagine held on to a dead tree. And you really don't want to do that when you're using the restroom. So you can take it from there.
Absolutely. Got it. Yeah, I'm there.
So I do not recommend are those kinds of stories and things that happened on the trail. My second year I ever went out on the trail, I do not recommend letting others pack food for you because I ended up eating seaweed as snacks on the trail. So I really don't.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
Somebody who had no clue what snacks were on the trail. So yeah, I went out with some girlfriends and we kind of divvied up tasks of to get ready. And my task wasn't to prepare the food; it was to do other things. So from that point on, no one ever has anything to do with what I eat on the trail but me. So I learned the hard way. I do not recommend not carrying anti-chafing equipment or anti-chafing cream on the trail.
I didn't carry it.
You didn't?
And I didn't chafe. Didn't get a blister
You're
the whole time.
the only person I know that
never once.
Never chafed on the trail.
No, never, ever.
Wow. I went out with my brother-in-laws, and they had major issues with chafing on the trail. So see, so I can't say that to you. Wow, I cannot believe that. You never had a blister?
Not a single blister the whole time.
Wow.
I lost all my toenails. I lost the feeling in my toes for about 6 months after the hike, but I didn't have a single blister.
I don't know if I would trade off a blister for losing the feeling in your toes.
But it came back, so it's okay. I can feel them now, but my toenails are still a bit of a shambles. But no, I never had a single blister.
Wow.
It was amazing to me as well.
That's amazing. So, yeah, what I do not recommend is just a series of things that I've done probably not once but twice, but they turn into like stories of the trail.
We've all got things, and like we said right in the very beginning, you learn stuff. If you don't know anything, then you learn it. You realise that was wrong. I won't do that again. And then you've now learnt something about hiking. You screw up again, you don't do that again. It works pretty well, I think. Now, I want to finish up with a couple of things. Now,
okay.
I know you told me that you liked hardship, and you refer to the highs of highs and the lows of lows. And you mentioned Jennifer Farr Davis as an inspiration, I guess, in that regard. Is this a more ornate way of using the phrase "embrace the suck," which I've heard a few times this year? In other words, I presume when even though the trail is sucking from time to time, you just got to embrace the whole thing.
Yeah, I call it owning the suck instead of embracing the suck.
All right, is that right?
Because you just have to own where you are in the trail.
That's the same with life. Isn't it?
Yeah, that's the same in life.
Got to own where you are. Yeah.
And sometimes on the trail, you really figure out who you are in the suck because you can't instantly get out of things. Like if you're out of water and you're not going to have water for 5 miles, you can't go to the drinking fountain. You can't go to the gas station and buy water. So you kind of have to own where you are in that moment. So yeah, I would say it's kind of piggybacking with embrace the suck for sure.
and when we spoke about doing this interview, you struck me with a phrase that you used. I'd asked you what you love about taking on the AT, and you said that the Appalachian Trail was where I was the best me. And I've heard other people say similar statements, and I often wonder why people discover that about themselves. Why do you think it applies to you?
I don't think I've learned for several years that the trail was the best place where I was the best me. And probably the best way for me to describe that is the trail is really where I let my guard down. And what I mean by that is, in your everyday life, you put up walls, you have barriers. I think the trail is where I let all that go. I have more emotion on the trail, and I accept my emotions.
Oh, really?
I don't normally cry in my everyday life. It's not like I'm not known as a crier, but on the trail, if I see something beautiful or I have an awesome conversation with somebody, I'm way more emotional on the trail.
I think everybody is, Julie. I think everybody is more emotional on the trail.
I know. It's just like, on the trail, I can be grubby if I want to. I can wear the same outfit every day. Yeah. And I also think on the trail, I'm more honest. Meaning, like, I'm more...
What does that tell you about yourself off the trail, then? Interestingly, now you said that.
Well, interestingly, I think just everyday life, you're on guard. Whether you're in traffic, whether you're watching, crazy stuff on the news, whether, you're dealing with multiple things that you have to deal with at work. I don't think you can ever let your guard down in your normal life. But I think on the trail, for me, it's easy to let my guard down because it's my natural self. Like I said, I'm okay with wearing the same outfit every day. I'm okay with not taking a shower. I'm okay with picking my food up off the ground and eating it.
You learn to get feral very quickly, don't you? It's surprising how you do embrace that part of it as well. Almost the dirty part of it. You enjoy that as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I don't, I've always loved to be a kid outside and play in the dirt and stuff like that. And I think the trail is my adult dirt, so to speak. It's like, it's just where you can go and nobody cares what you're doing. Like,
that's right.
It's the most diverse yet accepting place I've ever been.
What do you think I know you said you're a high school teacher. What do you think your students would think if they heard that?
They would think I'm crazy.
You're a teacher. They think you're crazy anyway.
Well,
don't worry about
that. Anyway. But I have adults that don't believe me when I say that. I think some of the kids think I'm crazy because in this day and age with computers they just swipe left and swipe right. Going outside to teenagers is not what it used to be. I've had kids say, "Oh my God, you spend the summer outside? It's too hot. It's too cold. It's too this. It's too that." And I'm like,
you should take a few of them on a trip. I'm sure they'd love it. Kids love it out there. Not kids. It sounds patronising. I don't mean to be.
I know exactly what you mean.
It would be great for them to be out there. The more and more I think about it, I don't know anybody who doesn't improve by being on the trail.
I agree.
Really don't.
I don't know if you can put it in words. I don't know if you can put it in a couple sentences or a phrase, because when it all comes down to it, you could have 10 of us on this, podcast right now, and I think we would all kind of come to the same conclusion. That's kind of why we're drawn to it. Yeah. And unless you've done it, you don't know. It's like...
Hope you suggest to your students they listen to this then, because they'll learn something about their teacher, which will be a really interesting thing for them to learn, won't it?
I'm actually going to play it for them. I will do that.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, look, thank you so much for reaching out, and I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I love the way you've approached this, and I just hope when you do finish your second thru-hike, you do finish it on Katahdin, and don't count the up and down of Katahdin. You've already done it, because you haven't. All right?
All right, will do.
Okay, lovely to talk to you, and we'll speak soon, okay?
Yes, let's do. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Cheers then. Bye. Isn't she great? She has a real passion for the trail, doesn't she? She put together something of a jumbled thru-hike over 12 years and is building another one at the same time. Yet again, she's doing her hikes the way she wants to do them. Remember, there are no rules. Do it your way or don't do it at all. She had a lot of bad luck with Moosilauke, but she decided it was going to be her Katahdin. I like that. She chose her Katahdin, and it turned out to be at the top of Mt Moosilauke. By the way, will somebody tell me how that mountain's name is actually pronounced? Send me an email with it broken down phonetically. That will really help me. For those of you who are preparing to step out onto the trail in 2018, I hope you listened to Julie when she said, "In everyday life, you're on guard." She found freedom on the AT that she really hadn't expected. So will you. So get ready for it. Don't forget to head on over to our other podcast, Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail Dream, where we follow Bruce Matson as he prepares to head out in February. While you're online, check out Trailtopia at trailtopia.com. Now, with the first of our new section about other trails, here is Eliza Newland telling us about North Fork Mountain Trail. Okay, there's a bit of an experiment, so this is our first go. I'd like to introduce you to Eliza Newland. Hi, Eliza, how are you?
Hi, Steve. I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. And Eliza took up the challenge of trying to talk to us about one of the smaller trails, and that's really the idea, to get smaller trails discussed, perhaps useful as practice hikes for the AT. And this one is the North Fork Mountain Trail, And when Eliza wrote to us, it said the North Fork Mountain Trail is a gorgeous shuttle following a ridge the entire way, is popular among mountain bikers and backpackers alike. So where exactly is the trail then, Eliza?
I think it's about 2.5 hours west of the DC metro area.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's just a little bit, it's close to Seneca Rocks and the Dolly Sods in the Mon National Forest. It's in the eastern mountains of West Virginia.
So how did you come to find it then?
Well, I was actually planning a backpacking trip with some friends of mine, and we were planning on going to Dolly Sods, but there was rain in the forecast, and Dolly Sods, when there's rain in the forecast, tends to get a lot more. And one of my friends said, well, let's go to North Fork because it's, very dry. And that's one thing about that trail is that that's one of the driest mountains in the Appalachians. So
that's good.
It doesn't rain much.
Well, that's good in one way, and I'll come back to that in a minute because it's not so good in another way, but I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah. So tell us something about the trail then.
Well, it's relentless views. Because you're following a ridge the entire way, except for about 2 miles on a forest road.
So not too many puds then, not too many pointless ups and downs, is that right?
Oh, they're not pointless because when you get to the top, you get a view to the left and a view to your right. It's not too hilly. I would say it's technical in a few places. I think that might be why the mountain bikers like it so much. All right. Because it's a challenge for them. But it's not altogether impossible for them either.
They tear down the paths, though, don't they? Is that dangerous ever?
Well, we were actually having lunch at an overlook, and there were like 30 of them tearing through, and we'd let them all pass before we got on the trail.
That's dangerous, though, isn't it? It makes you wonder, doesn't it, really, whether people actually get hit by these guys flying past.
Yeah, I've never seen. I've been on the trail quite a lot, and I haven't seen a mountain biker without a crew, like a group of them.
All right, I see.
And it's probably dangerous, but they tend to, holler a little bit, let you know, so you can jump off the trail.
Thank God for that, blimey. So, how many times have you actually done it then?
I've hiked it through, I think, 3 times, and then a 4th time just with some buddies. They were trail running the whole thing, and I was their shuttle.
Oh, I see. Okay. And have you been on the AT, by the way?
I haven't.
Not at all?
I think I grew up in Georgia, and so I've probably been on bits of it in North Georgia. I've been to Amicable. I've walked the stairs.
Oh, my gosh. Why? Why would you?
To see the waterfall.
See the waterfall, quite right too. Yeah. And the purpose of this in many ways is to talk about whether or not it will be a really good shakedown type hike for the AT. That's really where it came from, the idea to do this. Mm-hmm. So 24 miles, 25 miles, that's a 2 or 3 nighter, I guess? A 2-nighter, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, I've done it in 3 days or 2 days, and there's a shuttle service if you need one, if you're going up by yourself. And nice. I think it would be a really good shakedown hike. Yeah,
I should think so. And walking along the ridges, there's something special about it. There really is, isn't there?
Yeah, it's beautiful. One day I remember waking up way earlier than all of my friends and just watching the fog move in and out of the valleys, and it was just an exceptional morning.
Yeah, there is something about being above cloud and above fog that makes you feel really on top of the world, doesn't it? I love seeing it down the valley. It's awesome. Now, there does appear to be a problem, though, and you alluded to that earlier on. It's the driest mountain. So how did you solve the issue of water?
The first time we just packed a lot. And as I said before, there's a forest road, and it's kind of in the middle. And you can cache water. That's what we did the second time. And there's often cars on that forest road, people who are just like locals who want to take their family up to see the view. Yeah. And one time somebody offered us some water. He was a backpacker himself and was used to people walking. He saw us on the forest road, immediately identified us, and offered to fill up our bottles, which was really nice. Right.
That is nice, yeah. But yeah, it's a slight risk to go there without outboard, because I actually looked on the All Trails site and saw a comment by somebody called Kevin Orner, who says he's done the hike several times, and then he says that I usually stash some water and food along the logging road between miles 10 and 12 when headed northbound. It takes an hour or so to drive the road up past the campsites at the midway point, continue to the top of the power lines, drop off supplies and drive back down. that seems to be a quite sensible approach to stashing stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, and just, as a warning, that road, you really need four-wheel drive, I think, to get up that mountain road.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We were luckily in my friend's Subaru, but, my little Civic, I don't think would have made it. But there is also a spring.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, it's questionable whether or not it's a good water source. Last fall, it was running, or there was water coming out of it. So it's just not as reliable as other water sources, especially just because of the nature of the mountain, how dry it is.
Right. So when would you say was a really good time to hike it then?
I mean, I would say any time because I love it so much. But in the hot summer, I would say it's probably not the best time.
Right.
Maybe late September, early October, when the leaves are changing at the higher elevations in West Virginia. It would be a really beautiful time. And especially because of the lack of precipitation, you're not really at risk of snow, which is nice. Because over at Dolly Sods, which you can see from this ridge, one time I was hiking this ridge, and over at Dolly Sods, I could see that it was just covered in snow. And I had a buddy who was over there, and I just felt bad for him.
Oh, dear.
But, yeah, so, early, that fall period would be exceptional, and anytime, except the hot summer, just because it's so dry, it can get really, really hot.
I would think, yeah, and it's rated as difficult. I don't actually know what these ratings mean. Would you say what is a difficulty level as far as you're concerned?
I'd say the great majority of the trail is probably in the middle area of difficulty, not too hard. But then depends on which side you're coming from. The northern 3 miles or so are straight uphill, straight downhill. It's just 3 miles of descending.
Oh, wow.
When you're hiking north.
Is it quite a sharp descent?
It is. It's tough. Yeah, it's pretty sharp, and
that's where the rating comes from, I presume, obviously. Then.
Yeah, I think it does. It's very unforgiving.
Oh dear, well. That's not a good start. That's not right. But you know what? You know, if you're going to be hiking the AT, you're going to hit one or two of those. Well, more than one or two of those. And what sort of elevation does it get up to?
It's about 4,500 feet.
Oh right, so it's high enough. I mean, it's plenty high. So once you're up there, you're hanging about on the ridge pretty much most of the way, and then you come back. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great. I think something like this is a useful thing for people. So, is there any other tips you think to tell people about this trail?
I have one great post-trail breakfast recommendation.
Oh, very important. Very important. God, why didn't I think of that? What a great idea that is.
Seneca Rocks is a beautiful rock formation that's in the middle of the trail. You can't get there from the trail, but it's on the middle of the ridge. And so the town of Seneca Rocks, town in quotation marks, there's this little place called Yokum, and it has all sorts of stuff, touristy gift shop, and also climbing food and whatever else. But it also has this little deli in the back. And you can get, for $2.50, an egg and cheese biscuit that's just amazing.
Sounds like the way to go. Yeah. So would you go north to south, south to north?
I always go south to north, just so that I don't have to climb the hill at the beginning.
Okay.
That I get to go downhill at the end.
It's an out and back, isn't it?
Yeah. The parking at the northern end is way better. At the southern end, it's sort of, there's parking for probably a few cars, but it's on the edge of a really busy road, and it's in front of a gate that you're really not supposed to block because it's private property. The first few miles of the trail are on private property, or maybe just the first mile or so. But I would recommend. I
read about that. It says hiking's generally permitted on private property, but the hunting and bikes are not. So how do they get on? How do the bikes get on there? Do they just ignore that rule, or what?
They probably do. Yeah.
All right. We're not encouraging that, by the way. But okay, I accept that. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. I really appreciate your time and introducing us to the North Fork Mountain Trail. And I appreciate you telling us about it.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to.
Cheers, then. Speak to you soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. I really love walking along a ridge. And there's something so satisfying about being able to look down into a valley from above the clouds. I say, that never got old for me. That trail sounds really nice for an early fall hike, to find out what it's like to spend a couple of days living like a hobo. Hope that some of you are encouraged to give it a go, and if you've already been on it, hope you'll let me know what you think about it. Thanks to Eliza for sharing the North Fork Mountain Ridge Trail with us, and the location of a great breakfast place. I looked it up, and it is Yokum's Vacationland, the #1 ranked hotel in Seneca Falls, West Virginia. To be fair, that is #1 out of 2, but it's still #1. I'll put a link in the show notes to the trail and Yokum's. By the way, I meant to mention last week that one of our earlier guests, Kelly Anderson, or Sleeping Beauty, was in my neighbourhood a few weeks ago, and she came round to my house for lunch with Diane and me. She is just as lovely in person as she is on the podcast, with that South African accent and cute laugh. Great to see you, Kelly. Come back anytime. Recently, a number of you have kindly ordered my printed books directly from me rather than going to Amazon. They're $13.99 each, and with postage it really racks up. I sell them on my author's website for $25 for the pair, including postage. I also write a little message inside, so if you're looking for a Christmas gift for somebody who can't wait to learn everything they never wanted to know about a fat Brit hiking the Appalachian Trail, then go to www.steveadams.info/shop. Thanks. Next week, we're lucky to have Zach Davis on the show. Zach is a 2011 thru-hiker whose life was transformed by his experience. He wrote the best-selling Appalachian Trials and started the ubiquitous website The Trek, which is, as they say, dedicated to all things long distance. Zach is a really thoughtful guy, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing from him. Moving on now to Earl Schaefer's Walking with Spring. I read all of Chapter 3 last week. I don't know whether any of you noticed, but we're back to the first part of Chapter 4 this week. Earl passes over Max Patch, which was thrilling for me, and he becomes a bit of a celebrity for his thru-hike among the rangers and wardens. I'll see you next week. Chapter 4, Mountain Medley. A medley of summit pastures, spring flowers and whippoorwills, stone churches and upland rivers, and steep farm-sided hills. The valley of the Big Pigeon River, coming out of the Blue Ridge Loop, is the highest and most rugged of the watershed basins of the southern Appalachians. It is bounded on the southwest by the Balsam Mountains, described by Guyot as by far the most massive and continuous of all the transverse chains. Among these it may be called the master chain, as the Great Smoky, its close neighbour, is the master chain of the longitudinal ridges. The AT crossed the Big Pigeon River on a cable bridge at Waterville, a bridge that swayed and rocked as I ventured over. On the other side were the buildings of a small farm. Marking was vague, and I was fumbling around near the barn when a man hailed me from the porch of the house, insisting I come and set for a while. His name was J.L. Moore. When told I was from Pennsylvania, he insisted I surely knew Dick Lamb, who was from Philadelphia. Dick had knocked on the door one rainy night and begged for permission to sleep on the porch. Mr. Moore promptly insisted he sleep in the guest room, and now proposed that I do the same. I tried to decline with thanks, the time being mid-afternoon, but Mrs. Moore joined him in insisting, "Ain't anyone like you going to sleep on the mountain when we got a perfectly good extra bed?" The Moores were being talkative and kept on till midnight, one of their favourite subjects being Dick Lamb. He still wrote to them occasionally. I was to hear more of him months later in Vermont, and finally met him several years later. Mr. Moore wakened me at 5:30 a.m. to one of the most elaborate breakfasts imaginable. Mrs. Moore must have been up at least an hour earlier. Included were hot biscuits, cornbread, fried ham, fried eggs, bacon, spoon gravy, cereal, jam, butter, cow's milk, goat's milk, and probably more. Half an hour later, when I could hold no more, Mr. Moore ushered me out of the door, saying he knew I was anxious for an early start, but to come back as soon as the trip was finished and stay at least a week. Lots of talk and food, but very little sleep. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His last words were a hearty, "Good luck to you." From Waterville, the trail slanted upward to Snowbird Mountain, with the path overgrown and marking poor. At the top, near a large tree, 5 woods roads came together, with no indication of which way to go. Straight ahead led down into hill farm country and several neglected farms. At the second one, a seedy-looking man told me I had probably gone astray at Spanish Oak. Returning there, I tried all the roads before finding the right one. Marking beyond was so faint and the route so disrupted that the only way to proceed was by dead reckoning. Keep compass in hand for frequent checking and head that way. The book method of compass navigation is useless in dense woods. Marking resumed near Max Patch Mountain, a great grass-covered knoll where a herd of cattle was grazing. The sound of scuffling children, the scolding voice of a woman, and the blaring of a radio came from a weather-beaten house. Beyond, along a dirt road, were other houses that seemed to be abandoned. At dark, I was still on the road, trending northward but unsure of the way. The moon was rising, so I cooked supper by a spring and continued through a region of farms in hope of finding a good place to stop. But slopes got steep and the valley home lights flickered out one by one. Then the road turned abruptly through a gap at a boundary sign between Pisgah and Cherokee National Forests. It was time to stop regardless. The only spot flat enough was above a giant tree stump overlooking the road. Once in the wee hours, I woke to see the waning moon high overhead. My hunch was right. The trail turned along the state line over a grassy knoll and soon came to Walnut Mountain Shelter, which would have been most welcome the night before. At least it provided a place to cook breakfast. Beyond were brush and grasslands, then a section of recently logged timber. Roads had been bulldozed all over the mountain and guesswork was necessary again. The shambles ended and the trail resumed near Hot Springs, approaching town at the District Forest Service headquarters. The man on duty looked me over and said, "You must be that lone trail hiker we've been hearing about." Apparently the man on Wesser Board had passed the word. From this time on, for more than 500 miles to the northern end of the Shenandoah National Park, the rangers and wardens kept track of that lone trail hiker and offered to do whatever they could to help. The Appalachian Trail passes through Hot Springs to cross the French Broad River. This beautiful stream drains one of the largest enclosed valleys of the southern Appalachians, reaching past Asheville and almost to the state line of South Carolina. The highest headwaters are from Mt Mitchell. No colour film was available in Hot Springs, but the stores had plenty of food. The little black notebook says that $3.50 worth was purchased, and my aching back. Even half a dozen eggs were included. Fresh food would be eaten first, then back to staples like cornmeal, oatmeal, brown sugar and raisins. One advantage, more or less, in backpacking is that when you have less food for strength, you also have less weight to carry. Beyond town, I stopped to talk with a boy sitting on the porch of an outway house. His mother soon came out and told some of the local history. She mentioned a white-bearded old man who stayed for a while in an old hut on the mountain, then quietly disappeared. Another man, also bearded, had lodged in town and also roamed around studying flowers and birds. Farther up the ridge, the trailway was narrow along steep slopes. When dark closed in, the only flat place for sleeping was on the trail itself. Placing a pole on the outer side to prevent rolling off, I bedded down but slept badly, thinking a deer might come around the sharp bend in high gear. Another disturbing factor was a whippoorwill that kept flying back and forth and calling. Its nest must have been nearby. The lean-to that should have been reached was only a mile beyond. Talking when I should have been walking obviously had thrown me off schedule. But just seeing the lean-to and having a good place to cook breakfast cheered me so much I was singing one of my vagabond ditties at the top of my voice when, suddenly, the silence was deafening. A moment later came the clink of metal on stone. A root digger was about 100 feet away, plying his trade with mattock and gunny sack. His working had silenced the birds and my singing had silenced him. A few minutes later, as we talked, his two sons resumed digging nearby, startling me again. They had kept perfectly motionless and unseen until convinced I was friendly, a typical trait of such mountain people. The man said he liked the mountains real good, and often stayed out for weeks at a time. He said he had killed a rattler with 13 rattlers and a button a few days before, but that it was early for them to be crawling. He feared copperheads the most, putting it this way: "A rattlesnake's a gentleman. He'll sing and let you know he's there, but a copperhead just lays there and lashes out at ye." At Deep Gap, I stopped at the roadside restaurant for a change of diet. Adjoining was a store run by a man who originally was from Pennsylvania. He insisted I corroborate his claims about the many white-tailed deer in the Keystone State. Leaving my pack there, I ventured out to Greenville for colour film. Getting there was easy. A delivery man had stopped at the store. Returning was totally different. The baseball season was opening and everyone on the road was headed for the nearest diamond, or else was going fishing. Plenty of walking and 3 short pickups finally got me back. One driver was the proprietor of a gas station at the foot of the mountain. We discussed the upcoming presidential election. He thought Dewey would make a good president. Probably was one of the people interviewed by Gallup. From Deep End, the trail slants upwards several miles to Camp Creek Bald. Ed Tweed, the fire lookout, was a veteran of 11 years on the Camp Creek Tower. He said the ranger at Hot Springs had radioed about my coming through. Just then the phone rang. He listened, then winked in my direction while answering, "Yeah, he just pulled in. Must have missed you because of the logging mess over your way." It was the tower man farther south, on the torn-up mountain. Like the tower on Wesser Bald, the Camp Creek Tower was well equipped and Ed insisted I stay overnight. By now I knew that the lookouts get lonesome and like to have congenial visitors. Ed told of a time the previous year, soon after he came on the tower, while snow was still on the ground when he was below cutting firewood. He heard a roar on the next top, followed by a scream like a woman in mortal agony. Next thing he knew he was scrambling up the tower. Then an animal, tall as a yearling heifer, came by within 100 feet of the tower, screaming and roaring by turns. Next morning he found tracks as big as his clenched fist. At one point the animal had stepped over a knee-high log without brushing snow from the top. It had to be a mountain lion, rare in the Appalachians. My sleep that night was troubled, but not by cougars. About midnight I was wakened, as though it were dawn, but it was only the late moon shining through the many windows. Ed said he was bothered the same way. Otherwise the windows were fine, providing panoramic views. By day, the city of Greenville was plainly visible and the lights were brilliant at night. On the ridge eastward was an open field, used during the war as an emergency landing strip. Like the man at Wesser, Ed was reluctant to see me go. 2 hours later, the lone expedition came to Chestnut Log Gap, where an abandoned cabin stood at trailside. Upslope was a fine, sweet water spring. The mood was on me, and this is what I scribbled. Along the eastern line of Tennessee, high in a gap with vistas either way, the old log cabin fascinated me while passing by one sunlit April day. One end is tumbled down, the chimney stands half sundered from the once snug-fitting wall. Long since neglected of its builder's hands, an aura of decay pervading all. Who built this lofty home along the trail so long ago and chose the site so well? If these logs could speak, what rustic tale of plans and hopes and toil would they tell? Reluctantly I leave, for here there seems to be fulfilment of somebody's dreams. Hardly a cloud was in a bright blue sky as I moved along over a ridge-top pasture land and came to Big Butt Mountain, elevation about 4,900 feet. There I saw a grave with headstones for William Shelton and David Shelton, killed in a skirmish during the Civil War. Someone keeps the gravesite clear. Believe it or not, as I turned away, the clarion call of an eagle sounded overhead.